Standing up in McKinney. This is According to Callus, episode 666. Yes, it is that number, 666. Well, I think that I'm just going to embrace that. It doesn't have any meaning to my podcast, but it does have some meaning to biblical scholars. For the purpose of this, we're going to talk about what I would consider to be a very touchy subject, a very inflammatory issue, but it's in two parts. And before I do that, before I jump off into this, let me just say that, I've been doing this for a few years now. I'm the one-man show. It's certainly an investment of my time, my money, my efforts. I didn't necessarily ever expect to get rich doing this. Podbean has been somewhat disappointing. And I really don't know how much more time or effort I can afford to invest into building this if after nearly 700 episodes, I don't have a significant following that I can track on Podbean. Now, I suspect the issue is Podbean and not me, nor my followers. But be that as it may, at a certain point, you have to decide when do you hang it up. Well, the good news is I'm not hanging it up. The bad news is you can't do something for nothing forever. So, as I said, I was going to cut it down to 3 episodes a week. And no sooner did I do that, the following 2 weeks, I only get 2 episodes out. I will file that under sorry, not sorry. I mean, life gets in the way. It was Independence Day last week, and honestly, I was busy from Wednesday until Sunday, or yesterday, if you will. And I had time with my family, I had time with friends, and there's a whole lot of life going on out there, and I can only check out of that stuff so much to do this podcast. And I say that knowing that I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to quit. I'm just going to have to find a way to fit it in. So I've tried to, make the episodes a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth, if you will. I've spaced them out. I've tried to make it worth your time and your effort to invest in listening. I think one of the primary purposes of this show was to get you to think, to get you to question, and get you to see, as a listener, the other side of the story, or at least get some additional insight that you might not otherwise have. I think I have done my level best to remain objective as much as possible, but also not shying away from my opinion on the matter, right? So I think I can tell you something objectively and then tell you what I think without my opinion coloring the objective analysis as much as it might otherwise could. I truly enjoy what I'm doing, and it has been fulfilling insofar as it gets a lot of stuff off my chest, and it allows me to be involved with things that I, quite frankly, don't have all the time and effort to put forth to it. I know there are folks and friends of mine that go to the school board meetings every month, or the city council meetings every month. On top of that, they go to any number of a dozen different club meetings over the course of a month, as well as whatever the Collin GOP has put together for that month. And I can tell you firsthand that any week that you're going to 2 meetings a week, or perhaps 3 meetings a week, is basically a lost week. That's time you're never going to get back. And when you do things like that, it starts to eat up other things that are important. And as smart as I am, I can be rather dense on certain issues. And it's pretty bad when I have to be reminded of, other responsibilities. Not that I'm blowing them off. I don't want anybody to think that. It's just when you prioritize the wrong things, it affects other things in your life. So why do I bring this up? Why do I say that? Well, honestly, that's the reason why it's only been 2 episodes the last 2 weeks. Life's been there, and I don't want to keep missing life. I don't want to keep missing time with my wife, time with my daughter. It is a valuable time that I can never get back. So while I enjoy this, while this is my passion project, while, I grew it to the point where I was getting, 600 to 800 downloads every episode that I could see and track, to a fraction of that now. Again, I ascribe most of that to Podbean. There's no reason, there's no rhyme. And certainly, I don't believe it, because in real life, when I meet people, I see people, I routinely run across people and say, oh, yeah, I've heard your show. I know who you are. Oh, yeah, that's great. Oh, you're nice to meet you. That doesn't happen if you've only got a fraction of 600 people listening to you. That's nearly impossible. So something's not right. I don't know what it is. I submit to you the algorithm is upon us. I also submit to you that the numbers are never right. All that to say is, I'm a little frustrated, a little disappointed, but I take this all with good cheer, because the entire time I've been doing this, my goal was to build an audience, to get a word out, to encourage others, to hopefully get other people interested, right? Look, politics can be a dirty business. Politics can be depressing, and politics can be, quite frankly, just a beating. But there are a whole lot of other things at play. There's so many more things that are affected by politics. And, I had the tagline that I used a whole lot early on is, you may not care about politics, but it cares about you. The reality is, you can't ignore what's going on. You cannot pretend that government isn't involved with every aspect of your life. I really, truly wish we could. I've got a few friends of mine and myself, we all say, oh, man, I wish we could just move out to the boonies, get a little lake house or get a little farm and just check out and enjoy life. Now, my wife wisely points out that I would probably go nuts after about 3 months. I like being around people. I like being involved. This is all things that are important to me. And she's right. So as much as I might pine for that, I know in my heart that at best that's a respite place. That's a place where I can go check out and recharge. So the reality is y'all stuck with me just like I'm stuck with this, right? But why am I bringing this up? What's the point? Well, everybody has an end goal, right? Mine is to build the audience, to get the word out, to encourage people. That was my end goal of the podcast. Now, if I were to ever able to make any money off of it, right, maybe replace some of my income, that would have been great. That would have been fantastic. It doesn't look like that's something that's going to happen anytime soon. I never really planned on it. So, no harm, no foul. You could invest thousands of dollars in this and it may never be successful. And why would I want to do that? That's just foolish. But for right now, the time that I can invest, it's valuable, and I think it's helpful. And I'm fully aware that as politically active as I am, and as my own ambitions still exist, and I've created, I don't know, at this point, probably 400 hours worth of material, well, at least 350 hours worth of material that could be potentially used against me at some point in the future. And I accept that, but I will also point out that almost every episode is based on an opinion and understanding. As they say, I reserve the right to be wrong. And if you can prove me wrong, so be it. If I find out that I'm wrong, I will tell you. Things change, evidence changes. Outcomes don't always end up being what you prophesy. I've always been upfront. The show is called According to Callus because it is about what I think, what I know, or observations I'm making based upon my opinion. The entire point of this is to spur thought. If you come here expecting that I'm, the ultimate arbitrator of truth or arbiter of truth, you're going to be sadly mistaken. There's only one person that has that title, and it ain't me. There is a book that could be utilized if you so choose. Talk to any Christian. They'll be happy to tell you all about it, I'm sure. Otherwise known as the Bible, right? The Word of God, right? So I'm fairly well read. I consider myself fairly well educated. I've had a lot of life behind me. I've done a lot of different things. I've been a few places. I have some experience. So when I come here and I talk about my opinions, my thoughts on things, it's not, some kind of vacuous stunt. It's not some ill-mannered, ill-tempered, ill-educated, moronic nonsense, though I know some of my critics may say that. But the fact of the matter is, I do have a degree in political science and history. Yes, I double majored, and I did go to postbaccalaureate studies in education. I completed all the courses to be a teacher, and I am qualified to teach both history and political science. But for a quirk of fate, I could be a combined social studies qualified teacher. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, I was not willing to work for free for a year, essentially. So that got set aside. And it became a moot point working towards a master's degree because there was no end. I spent over 20 years in the automotive service business, doing various different things, and ultimately I served as an assistant service manager. And I learned a lot. I mean, I started turning wrenches when I was a punk teenager, essentially. And I learned a lot of aspects of that business. And as any career can burn you out, it burned me out. I transitioned to a different role and a different career, and I've enjoyed that time. I've learned a lot. And I think that, it's a lifetime of experience, right? I ran for office. I ran my own campaign. I've unofficially consulted with more than one campaign. I've done the block walking. I've done the, advertising work. I've done all those different things. All the while, I've read lots and lots of different books. And, I've been honest. I have the guilty pleasure of reading dystopian novels or post-apocalyptic novels. They're thought-provoking. They're educational. There's all these different things that you do in your life, and they add to who you are and what you think and how you observe things. I came up as basically a young libertarian. I was never necessarily a capital L libertarian, but I was always a small L libertarian. Time went on, I kind of figured out that, maybe that's not the best descriptor of what I am. But on the flip side, I've been wholly disappointed by the conservatives, whether they're the big C, conservicon, whatever nonsense, members of the big con, right? Like Big Eva, or perhaps, maybe a paleocon. I do like what Pat Buchanan had to say back in the day. I've read some of the other paleocons. Some of their stuff's very interesting. And they were smart enough to realize that you can't have economic freedom without some amount of social freedom, right? And you can't have social liberties if you're economically oppressed. So the two do go hand in hand, and it's kind of a balancing act. So now as you go through life and you kind of, adapt to the situation you're in. And, I was raised in what I would call a very strict, small Bible church environment. Now, fortunately, my parents were not over the top on some of this stuff, but, you get older and it's like, well, why did we do that? Or what was the reason behind that? It didn't make sense. I think Chesterton refers to these as fences, right? There's those fences that were there for a millennia, and you start tearing them all down, and maybe you figure out why they were put there in the first place. So it's not necessarily recommended to do that. So you get to a point in your life and you have this amount of wisdom that you've picked up, this life experience, and then you have your opinion. So I look at myself and I say, I don't really think that I'm meant to run for municipal office. I think I'm a little too political for that. Not to say that I'm not a practical guy, not to say that I can't, cut a deal or make things work, but I think that I tried my hand at that. Didn't work out so well. I'm a little bit too partisan for that. But on the flip side, as a partisan, I'm the first guy to say, yeah, you can hold your principles, but your principles mean nothing if you can't win. And sometimes that means you have to dial down your preferences while keeping your principles to get the person that best reflects your chance at winning. So that from time to time, that means you're stuck with a guy like John McCain. Or perhaps if you want something more local, Jeff Leach, right? So maybe you don't personally like them. Maybe they're not the exact reflection of what you deem to be a conservative icon. But guess what? They were successful. They won. And most of the time, they do what we would like for them to do. They carry our water. They do a good job. They're effective. And you learn to make peace with that over time. And some would call it mellowing. I don't know if it's mellowing. It's just understanding the world isn't always what you want it to be. So this whole time, my entire life, I've considered myself a good, solid Christian conservative, liberty activist, however you want to define that. And I've always tried to balance the idea of personal liberty with Christian responsibility. Knowing full well that there are a whole lot of people that may call themselves Christians that really aren't. There's a whole lot of people that explicitly are not Christian. And I have to deal with them and work with them in a world that we can agree on certain things are right and wrong. So it's in this vein, this, 15 minutes or whatever I've taken of this time for this introduction, that I am now going to jump off into something. The purpose of this is not so much to say what I believe is right or wrong. I think I can make a pretty good case for what I actually believe. But what this is really going to be is an observation of problems and various reasons why they exist, and what perhaps we could do to address those problems. Not necessarily looking to place blame on a specific person or entity or group of people, but accepting that's just the way the world is right now, and how do we fix this? Now, this is a culmination of, quite frankly, the fact that I finished reading the Boniface option again. I'm about halfway through Point Man again, and I'm still rolling through Nehemiah in the Bible. And I'm always looking at this idea of good leadership requires people that are willing to be leaders. And there's many different variations in understanding of what a good leader is, or what a leader should be. For purpose of this, the leader's supposed to be the man. And you can choose to understand the man as in a male, or just the man as in like a figure. And I would say this, biblically speaking, generally, it's a man always in charge. And when it's not, it's usually some form of punishment. And again, look, I know there are exceptions to the rules, and it's not my argument. So, and I know I'm familiar with some of those exceptions, and I know that there are other reasons certain things happen. So, but the problem is, men don't know how to be men anymore. Now, it's convenient to blame feminism. It's convenient to blame ecumenism. It's convenient to blame, just weak men in general, or homosexuals if you prefer. It's convenient to blame all of those. But I think at the root of it, it comes from a demonic or a satanic worldview. And I realize I've just tuned some of you out. Bear with me for a second. If it makes you feel better, let's just say evil or inversion. What do I mean by that? Well, in Genesis, it talks about the idea that when they sinned, Adam and Eve, and look, you don't have to take it as literal. You can take it as a metaphor, whatever floats your boat. But it says that the woman's going to seek to control her husband, seeking to invert the power structure. And before you all go off on me defending patriarchy, not really. Any wise married man knows that his wife is his partner and in many ways has wisdom in things that he does not have. For example, my wife and I are both educated. My wife and I both are pretty darn smart, but I will tell you flat out, she has more emotional intelligence than I do. She just does. Now, I pick up on some things that maybe she doesn't, but by and large, when we meet somebody, she can peg them right off. And it may take me 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years to figure out, yeah, she kind of had that right from the get-go. And I got to be honest, sometimes that's frustrating. But I think part of it is my programming, right? Being involved in politics, being involved in just political things, you just assume that people aren't always being truthful. You always assume that people are putting on a show. One of the advantages I have is I just kind of am who I am. So, I might behave myself a little differently if I'm in a hostile crowd, or I might cut loose a little bit more if I'm in, a safe space. But by and large, I'm the same person. I don't really hide much of anything. It's just sometimes a little more open than others, but generally very consistent. Why does this matter? Well, if you can't be a man and you don't know how to lead, you feel threatened by other men and you feel threatened by other leaders. I gotta say, I've observed that firsthand in many different places and with many different people where they don't like when they're being challenged for authority. They don't like letting somebody else take charge. They don't like not being in charge. And I kind of find it humorous because usually I don't want to be in charge. My default thing is I'm happy to help. I'm happy to take lead on a specific issue, but I don't necessarily want to be in charge for a number of different reasons. And it's not that I didn't shirk the responsibility, because I've always accepted my responsibility. In fact, most guys I know, that's kind of a problem we have. We just accept the responsibility. We say yes. We just accept what's coming down. I'm not sure why that is, but we just bear with it as best we can. We do what we can. But we don't also feel threatened by people that are better than us at something or another, or maybe are further up the chain of command somewhere or another. It's just, we're there. Now, full disclosure, I really thought I would be further in, career that I used to have. And I'm very grateful to be out of it, because I was burned out. I was wore out. I needed a break. And I'm grateful for that. But if I didn't admit that I was disappointed, I would have never been able to move on. If I didn't accept the fact that didn't work out the way I had hoped, I wouldn't be successful at what I'm doing now. But why does this matter? I spent a lot of time training up young men to become adult men, to become men. They were transitioning from boys to men. That wasn't my job. I was their, Sunday school teacher, the youth group, small group leader, whatever you want to call it. But I noticed in dealing with other people their age, there is a whole lot of young men, older boys, that had no idea how to become men. So, again, in the various readings, is it because they didn't have a father? Is it because their mothers undermined their father all the time? Is it because their father was always gone at work, so it was like an absentee father? Or it was because the father didn't know how to be a father either? Or was it because the mother was trying to be the father and the mother? There's so many different things here, right? So, again, generalizations. You don't want to blame anybody. But if a man can't be a man, and a man doesn't train up his boys to become a man, how can we have a leader? How can anything be led well by men if they don't know how to do it? And this directly correlates to the notion that the woman seeks to control her man. She seeks to be in charge. And a whole lot of weak men are very content to allow that to happen. And look, it's a joke, right? Happy wife, happy life. I got admonished by a friend of mine. No. It's happy spouse, happy house. Fair enough. You're correct. And sometimes it's just easier to make peace, right? Not argue. Who cares? Whatever. That's what you want. Fine. But the reality is, women want certain things. And one of the things that I've read over and over again is they want security. And because men don't know how to lead, and men don't know how to take care of their family, and men don't know how to actually provide security anymore, this is perhaps the underlying reason why so many women, one, try to take charge, and two, they want big government to be their daddy. They want it to be big daddy government. Now, again, look, this gross generalizations, everything's different for everybody. I get all that. We're just talking about a 10,000-foot view here. If women don't vote, conservative Republicans win every race, every time, regardless of race or culture. It's just a fact. The more conservative, stronger leader, more freedom-orientated group wins. They've run the polls, they've run the numbers. There's plenty of evidence and proof out there. Go find it if you doubt me. So why is that? Well, there's any number of reasons why you could do that, but I think it's a strange desire. They want to be taken care of, but they want to be free. They don't want to have to worry about anything, but they want to be able to do whatever they want. But my observation is that's not just women that want that. I see a lot of boys that want that too. So then I think to myself, is it because they're still boys or because they don't know how to be men? I think it's a fair question. I don't really have a solid answer on why that is, but I see an odd corollary there, right? Part of being a man is accepting responsibility. Part of being a man is willing to take on the mantle of leadership. And leadership always entails responsibility. I've talked about multiple times the notion that a good leader will see to their people first. In the military context, right, the lieutenant or the sergeant or the captain or whatever always make sure that their men are taken care of first before they'll take a break, before they'll sit down and eat, before they'll take their break. That's a mark of a good leader because they're making sure their people are taken care of. In a team, the team that is happier and taken care of and respected will generally perform much better than another team. Their leader motivates and inspires them, doesn't berate them, doesn't beat them, doesn't abuse them to get them to do work. They willingly and joyfully will do work and get things done. And not just for their boss, for their leader, but for them as well, for a unified goal, an idea that they're looking to support. So why is that? Because that's what they do. There's a natural flow of events there. So on the one hand, when we look at things, we see women want to be taken care of. They want to be protected, but then they want to do whatever they want. And they don't want to have to face consequences. But then when you look at an immature man, a boy, if you will, you see much the same thing. A boy knows that if he's protected, he can pretty much do whatever he wants. A boy that never has to face any consequences or never has to bear responsibility for their abuses or their disobedience will only do it more. So if they grow up like that and they consider that as their future and that's what they become, then we've got a bunch of immature men that don't know how to be men, that don't know how to be leaders, that don't know how to take care of a family, that don't know how to take care of themselves. Now, once upon a time, we used to call them mama's boys. We used to dismiss them as not being a man. And when I look at the current generation of young adults now, I am kind of curious. The whole concept of a failure to launch always seemed to be kind of a laughable exception to the rule. But I do see it more and more. And I see it in guys that would be otherwise intelligent, well put together people, but they look at the world around them and they see no way out. They're not allowed to be men anymore. They might exhibit some toxic masculinity, and we can't have that. They're not allowed to define themselves in their maleness. They're penalized for being a male. Some of them are penalized for being white males, and God forbid that they're all straight, because can't have that either. So when they look at it and they observe the world that we're in today, is it any wonder why they've all but given up? I mean, even if they knew how to be men, they're disincentivized to act like men. They're punished for doing what they should be doing. And we look at our civilization in these United States, and I wonder where that's going to lead us. Rolling back about 120 years, if you will, turn of the 20th century, 1900 or so, if you will, we had the massive progressive movement. We had the women's rights. Those two things worked together, and they undermined every bit of our society, every bit of what made America, America. And quite frankly, they damaged, and most of the damage was already done in Europe. The whole ideal of socialism or socialization is taking from those that produce to give to those that don't, to babysit them, to protect them, to coddle them, reinforces bad behavior. And we built upon that and rewarded more bad behavior. I mean, in the early 60s, we said, well, yeah, I mean, if you want to be promiscuous, you ought to be able to prevent yourself from getting pregnant. And if you are promiscuous and you do get pregnant, well, then obviously you ought to be able to kill the baby. Oh, and by the way, if you're promiscuous, you got pregnant, and you choose not to kill the baby, well, we're just going to go ahead and give you some money to raise the baby. But if you get married and have a husband at home, we're not going to give you that money. So, I mean, who would have thought that would turn out to be a problem, right? I mean, you reward families for not having a father, essentially. You reward mothers who continue to have more babies, and you equally reward them by making it permissible, acceptable, and encouraging killing babies. And it's this strange desire, if you will, to have ultimate freedom but zero responsibility that led to the idea that somehow it was a morally acceptable idea that I can go be promiscuous, get myself pregnant, and just simply kill a baby because it's inconvenient. And now, fast forward 60 years, and guys like me are the bad guy because we're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not a good idea. You ought not do that. That is murder, you know. That's not something that should be tolerated. But somehow I'm the one that's out of sync. And when I say me, I just saying people that have that point of view, we're out of sync, right? Because we treasure the baby. It's not that we don't care for the mother. It's just we accept that the mother made a mistake and now she has to accept responsibility for that mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it's one of the 2% that something happened that was outside of their control. So you don't fix that crime by creating another crime. But apparently that's what we do now. So, and again, because there's no man there, and there's no man, to be the leader, to be the protector, to be the partner, what else is a woman going to do? I mean, a case in point, many of our churches, we've bought into the idea of egalitarianism, right? that men and women are equal. They're basically the same. They just have different plumbing. And apparently, our society's even done away with the notion of different plumbing and different genetics because, a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. And then tomorrow they can change back. And sometimes they have some surgery where they cut off healthy body parts to pretend they're something else. And that's all perfectly acceptable and normal. And, oh, by the way, we're not going to worry about that promiscuity or the perversion that you might take part in because, God is love. Again, no responsibility. How does that work? How do you expect to build and maintain a successful civilization and society if nobody ever has to accept responsibility? Bringing it back to the first key point. The woman wants to be in charge. By order of creation, she's supposed to be a helpmate. She's supposed to be a partner. She shouldn't have to take that burden on. But because we've done such a good job of destroying men, destroying young men to where we boost and do everything we can to raise young women, which is fine. I mean, I raised 2 daughters. I have a wife. They're all educated. They're all, moving on their ways and various successes. They're strong. They're opinionated. And that's all well and good. And they're going to partner with a good man. And the man's going to lead them. And they're hopefully going to be successful further in life. Hopefully even more successful than I as a father was with our life. Which is typical and normal behavior for generations past, that you want what's best for your children and you want them to do better than you did. But I fear for a society where we can't build up young men to become leaders and strong leaders at that. And we punish them for exhibiting any of the normal male characteristics. And in fact, we do everything we can to raise up women and put them in positions of authority to power, and quite frankly, destroy those young men so they're not capable of functioning for the very role they were designed to do. We're rewriting the order of creation because somehow we know better. So when I look at that, and I see that, quite frankly, I don't see how much longer it can go on as it is. It doesn't make sense to me. We have literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of women out there that claim to be good Christians. Their own claims, not mine, their own claims, yet they're perfectly okay with and or have participated in worship of Moloch by murdering their unborn children or protecting those that did, or making excuses for those that did. And as men, as husbands, as fathers, as leaders, we should be admonishing them. That's unacceptable. That's wrong. That is anti-Christian. That is violation of what Christianity believes and says, but we don't. Whether it's our pastors or elders or other husbands or fathers, we have fallen down on that job. The question is why and how? Could it go back to the idea that we've destroyed what it is to be a man? That biblical manhood has been rewritten to be toxic masculinity and unacceptable and must be stamped out at all costs? I've often heard the claim that matriarchy is better than patriarchy. Now, I know there are some examples of matriarchy. I don't think there are any in Europe for at least the last 500 years. I know they existed before then. Some of the pagan tribes in the north were matriarchal in nature. I know there's some places in Africa, and I imagine in Asia that I've read about or seen stories about, where they were matriarchal in nature by their own decision. And in some regards, that was a net positive, right? Maybe. But by being matriarchal, they deny the role that the man has to play. They ostracize the man. They basically reinforce the notion that a man can be an irresponsible, rudderless ship, doing whatever it is that they want to do and never having to accept the responsibility or the mantle of being a leader or a man. I mean, if that's what matriarchy nets, then I wonder if there's the corollary in fiction, right? Some of you are at least somewhat familiar with the idea or the notion of the Amazons, right? Themyscira. Now, most of this is based off of Greek mythology, if you will. It's not to say that it couldn't have existed in some way, shape, or form. But what's interesting is I don't remember exactly all the details, but essentially they lop off one of their breasts so that they can better pretend to be men as they replace men to run their society strictly by women. And they know that they can't reproduce naturally, so there were various explanations of how this is accomplished. And again, I've heard various explanations how they deal with the unwanted men, either after the mating or when they're born. How do they deal with that? And, again, different interpretations, different explanations, but essentially they would utilize captured warriors or sailors to propagate their group, and when they had used them up, they threw them out. Or they just threw them in prison and made them do work. Who knows? Again, it's different variations, different understandings. I don't think there's a perfect answer. And again, I'm looking at this more from the idea of a thought exercise rather than what really happened, because it doesn't really matter. So you are a society of only women, and roughly 50% of all the babies born are going to be men. And your society explicitly does not want men. So one of two things happens. You kill them or you exile them. And I guess I imagine this is before the time where they could have, cut body parts off to pretend they were females. Just saying. Although they could castrate them. I mean, that was a known thing back then. But somehow that was acceptable or appropriate. It's odd. Very odd. So that idea or that matriarchy felt that the best way to deal with men was to exile them or to kill them. And when that didn't, when they weren't up for that, then maybe they castrate them. So is it possible the spirit of that is transferred through the feminism, is transferred through this egalitarianism, right? We just need to neuter all the men, right? If we make men behave like women, then the women will feel safe. If we make men act like women, then we don't have to ever fight about anything anymore, right? And legitimately, the women might have a chance to dominate. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that? No, that's not really what's happening now, is it, ladies and gentlemen? Because there are a number of men that pretend to be women that show up in women's sports and dominate the field. So I guess that's not going to work either. Again, look, this last portion is really more of a thought experiment. And as always, this is opinion. This is me asking questions. This is me wanting you to think about the situation. Think about what it is that's going on around us. How do we deal with this? Is there a way through this? I would suggest that maybe we should let boys grow up to be men. And rather than discouraging young boys from being boys, we should encourage them to accept that responsibility and to transfer their energy and their vitality as young men, young boys, into becoming adult men and lead well and protect those around them and invest in a family. We should reward and encourage, quote unquote, good behavior, appropriate manhood. We should reinvest in the idea of what it is to be a man. Doing the exact opposite of what society is telling us is the right thing to do right now. I mean, that's just one man's thought. And again, if you're interested, if you're curious on how this works, there's any number of books on the issue. Go read them. If you're curious where I'm coming up with some of this data or background to come up with some of these questions or these connections, again, there's plenty of books out there. Go read them. Do your own research. As I come to the end here, I want to just remind you, every episode of this is done more or less off the top of my head. And again, I reserve the right to be wrong from time to time. I reserve the right to misunderstand something. But what I really want you to understand, the major takeaway here is, you should never ever trust anything that anybody tells you without first checking it yourself. You should always do your own research. You should never just take my word for it or anybody's word for it. Because we could be wrong, or quite frankly, some people lie. Just saying. Do your own research. Make sure that what you hear, what you see, what you read makes sense. That it's reasonable. Now, there's some things I said that some people could argue are unreasonable. There are some things that I said that some people could get a little upset about. That's okay. It's supposed to be thought-provoking. It's supposed to be forcing you to confront the issues that we have in front of us. And honestly, a strong, independent woman should not feel threatened by anything, or should not be or feel threatened by anything that I've said or posited today. Because if they're being honest with themselves and with each other, they'll know there's a lot of truth in what I said. And they will probably also be willing to recognize the fact that, yeah, they might in fact be happier if they were to allow nature as created by God to actually take place. And with that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.